nuts for a change.
Empty Nest was one of the most watched shows on American television, and almost nobody remembers it existed. There was a time when 29 million people tuned in for a single episode, when it outrated the legendary show it spun off from, when it sat comfortably in the top 10 every single week for 3 straight years. And then something went quietly, tragically wrong. Not the dramatic implosion kind of wrong, the slow, suffocating kind. The kind where a hit show loses a beloved cast member to a hidden mental health crisis, where a network pulls away its only lifeline without warning, where the anchor of the whole enterprise is quietly battling a terminal illness through the final seasons, and where, by the end, barely 6 million people were still watching. This is the story of a show that deserved better. A show that built something genuinely warm and funny and human, and then watched it get dismantled piece by piece. And most of the people who loved it never even knew it was happening. Before we start, give this video a like if you watched Empty Nest back in the day, and subscribe for more retro TV deep dives. The story begins with Susan Harris, the writer and producer behind some of the sharpest, most unconventional comedy of the late 1970s and 1980s. Harris had already changed television once, with Soap, the audacious ABC parody serial that made a household name of actor Richard Mulligan. She had done it again with The Golden Girls, the NBC phenomenon that launched in 1985 and immediately rewrote the rules for who could anchor a primetime sitcom.
Well, the point is nobody knows why two people fall in love, and it's really nobody's business.
By 1987, The Golden Girls was one of the biggest shows on television, and Harris was thinking about what could come next, not a replacement, but a companion. A show set just down the street from the 4 women on Biscayne Boulevard, exploring a different emotional territory that primetime had never seriously touched. Empty nest syndrome, the specific grief of a parent whose children have moved out and whose house has gone suddenly, unnervingly quiet. The first attempt to make this work aired on May 16, 1987, as the Season 2 finale of The Golden Girls, a backdoor pilot featuring Rita Moreno and Paul Dooley as a married couple across the street, grappling with exactly that feeling. Rita Moreno herself later called it a disaster. Susan Harris was ill during production and could not do the rewrites the script needed. The Golden Girls cast was reportedly tense throughout the taping, and audiences agreed with their instincts. The episode remains one of the lowest rated in the entire run of the series. The network shelved the spin-off plan entirely, but Harris did not give up on the idea. She went back to the drawing board and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of a bickering married couple, she built the show around a widower, a warm, slightly overwhelmed pediatrician named Harry Weston, whose wife has recently died and whose 2 adult daughters have moved back home to look after him. And for the role of Harry Weston, she went back to someone she trusted completely, Richard Mulligan, the lanky, rubber-faced comedic actor who had won her a loyal audience on Soap. Mulligan was not the only name considered. The producers looked at several established television actors for the role. But Harris had worked with Mulligan before. She knew his particular genius for playing befuddled warmth without turning it maudlin, and when he signed on, the character clicked into place immediately. For the role of Barbara Weston, Harry's tough younger daughter, a police officer with a chip on her shoulder and a soft center she worked hard to hide, the producers cast Kristy McNichol. McNichol had been one of the most recognizable faces on American television through the late 70s and early 80s, winning 2 Emmy Awards before age 20 for her work on the ABC drama Family. She had stepped away from the spotlight for several years, after what she described only vaguely as a nervous breakdown. Empty Nest was her return, and audiences greeted her warmly. Completing the core family was Dinah Manoff as Carol, Harry's neurotic, romantic, endlessly self-sabotaging older daughter, a role that gave Manoff room to play the kind of comedy that requires courage as much as timing. And sitting just outside the Weston front door was David Leisure as Charlie Dietz, the mooching, skirt-chasing neighbor who had survived the failed pilot in a different form, his name changed, but his shamelessness intact. Empty Nest debuted on Saturday, October 8, 1988, tucked into NBC's legendary Saturday night lineup immediately after The Golden Girls. The pilot drew 29.3 million viewers, 29 million people. For its first full season, the show finished 9th in the national Nielsen rankings, with a rating of 19.2, placing it alongside Cheers and Murder, She Wrote as one of the defining programs of that era of NBC dominance. The second season held almost perfectly at 9th place again, with a rating of 18.9. The third season climbed to 7th place, with a 16.7 rating, a season where Empty Nest outranked The Golden Girls itself for the first time, and did so without drama, without gimmicks, simply by being consistently, reliably excellent. Richard Mulligan won both an Emmy Award and a Golden Globe for Best Lead Actor in a Comedy Series in 1989. Park Overall, who played Laverne Todd, Harry's sharp-tongued, fiercely proud Southern nurse, received 3 Golden Globe nominations across the run of the show. What made Empty Nest land so differently than a typical spin-off was the specificity of its emotional core. This was not a show about wacky misunderstandings or high-concept premises. It was a show about a man trying to understand who he is without his wife, and 2 daughters trying to figure out who they are without the version of home they thought they had left behind forever. Harry Weston was not a fool or a buffoon. He was a good man who had built his life around a woman who was gone and who now found himself eating cereal for dinner and asking his adult daughters for advice about dating for the first time in 20 years. There was something true in that, something that the 35 to 60-year-old audience of late 80s NBC recognized in their bones. And that recognition, multiplied across millions of Saturday nights, turned Empty Nest into something genuinely beloved. But here is where the story starts to unravel, because the show's golden era depended on conditions that were never permanent, and the people responsible for managing those conditions made choices that would prove catastrophic. The first blow came from inside the cast. Midway through season 5, in October of 1992, Kristy McNichol went on medical leave. The announcement was quiet. The production company confirmed she was dealing with a health issue and expressed hope she would return. She did not for the rest of the season. The character of Barbara Weston simply vanished from the storylines while the writers scrambled. A replacement daughter named Emily, supposedly away at college all this time, was hastily introduced, played by Lisa Riefel. Riefel left after a single season. The third Weston daughter was never seen again. McNichol herself would not speak publicly about what happened until 2001, when she finally said plainly she had been suffering from bipolar disorder, and it had become impossible to hide. She described years of constant anxiety, non-stop crying, a feeling of shaking that never went away. Leaving the show, she later told the Los Angeles Times, was the hardest decision she had ever made. The loss of Kristy McNichol cracked the show's foundation. But it was the second blow that shattered it entirely, and that blow came not from within the cast, but from a decision made by NBC programming executives, the kind of decision that looks baffling in retrospect and seemed questionable in real time. In 1992, The Golden Girls ended its run on NBC. The network had used that show as the anchor of its Saturday night lineup for 7 consecutive seasons, and Empty Nest had been the beneficiary of that arrangement, placed immediately after The Golden Girls in a time slot that guaranteed an audience already settled in and ready to watch. When The Golden Girls left, NBC lost its Saturday anchor and, crucially, never found a suitable replacement. The shows they tried around Empty Nest, The Torkelsons, Nurses, The Mommies, a parade of forgettable half-hours, failed to hold the audience that had once turned NBC's Saturday night into appointment television. The Golden Girls spin-off, The Golden Palace, went to CBS and lasted exactly 1 season. What had been the most powerful Saturday night block in network television was now just a collection of shows sitting in a graveyard slot with no lead-in, no audience momentum, and no institutional support from a network that had already redirected its energy toward Thursday nights and a little show called Seinfeld. The numbers tell the story with brutal efficiency. Season 4 of Empty Nest, the first season after The Golden Girls moved its time slot, dropped from 7th to 23rd in the national rankings. Season 5, the season McNichol left, fell to 48th. Season 6 landed at 66th. By Season 7, the show that had once drawn 29 million viewers to a single pilot episode was ranked 118th nationally, averaging fewer than 7 million viewers a week. The show that had once beaten the Golden Girls in the ratings was now struggling to justify renewal. And that was far from the worst of it. What the audience sitting at home on Saturday nights did not know was that Richard Mulligan, the man holding the entire show together, was quietly dealing with a diagnosis that would eventually kill him. He continued working through the final seasons of Empty Nest with a professionalism and warmth that his co-stars would describe with awe in the years that followed. Park overall later said that Mulligan was her mentor and one of the finest men she had ever worked with. He never let the cameras see what was happening off them. The show's final episode aired on June 17, 1995. Kristy McNichol returned for it, giving Barbara Weston a proper farewell that the character had been denied when the health crisis pulled her from the set 3 years earlier. There was something quietly moving about that, a reunion without fanfare, in front of an audience that had shrunk to a fraction of what it once was, for a show that NBC had already stopped mentioning in its promotional materials. Richard Mulligan died on September 26, 2000, at his home in Los Angeles, following a long battle with colorectal cancer. He was 67 years old. Now, this is where the story gets interesting, because Empty Nest left a legacy that runs deeper than most people realize. The three-show universe that Susan Harris built in Miami, The Golden Girls, Empty Nest, and the hospital-set spin-off Nurses, was one of the first genuine experiments in shared universe television storytelling on a major American network. The Hurricane crossover event, the Full Moon crossover event, 3 shows airing back-to-back on the same night, with storylines that literally crossed into each other's sets. That was ambitious, coordinated, innovative television production in 1991 and 1992. The idea of treating multiple shows as chapters of the same ongoing world, of giving a loyal audience a reason to watch the entire evening rather than just one show, would not be mainstream practice for decades. Every streaming platform building its own interconnected universe of prestige television is working from a blueprint that Susan Harris assembled in Miami 30 years ago. Richard Mulligan remains one of only 2 actors in history to win the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series for 2 entirely different series, Soap in 1980 and Empty Nest in 1989. That distinction is extraordinary and almost never mentioned. Kristy McNichol left acting entirely after returning for the finale, made her last on-screen appearance in that 1995 episode, and later retired from Hollywood at 40 after coming out publicly as a lesbian. She has described her life since leaving the industry as genuinely joyful, a life of teaching, of privacy, of being, in her own words, the biggest role she has ever played. Dinah Manoff stepped away from Hollywood and found her calling in education, teaching acting to young people in Washington State and writing a novel about a woman navigating the absurdities of the entertainment industry. Park overall went back to her native Tennessee, continued working intermittently in television and film, appeared in the Oscar-nominated Mississippi Burning, and became an outspoken environmental activist. David Leisure continued acting in television movies and guest roles for years after the show ended. Estelle Getty, who joined Empty Nest in its final 2 seasons, reprising her Golden Girls character, Sophia Petrillo, passed away in 2008 following a long illness. Empty Nest ran for 7 seasons and 170 episodes. At its peak, it was one of the 10 most-watched programs in the United States. It launched from the most-watched Saturday night in network television history, built something genuine and warm and funny, out of a premise that most people in 1987 thought had no business being a sitcom, and then got quietly dismantled by a network that moved on, an anchor show that ended, and a cast that paid real human costs the audience never saw. Not bad for a spin-off that NBC almost never made. Not bad at all. If this deep dive brought back some memories, give the video a like and subscribe for more retro TV deep dives. Thanks for watching.